The message came through at 3 in the morning, broken and weak, barely more than static and desperation. Commander Danny Cole sat alone in the monitoring station of Earth Defense Command, watching the signal flicker across his screen like a dying heartbeat. He had been on night duty for 6 hours, and nothing interesting had happened until now. He leaned forward and adjusted the filters, trying to clean up the transmission. Most of it was garbage, corrupted by distance and interference. But 3 things came through clearly: a set of coordinates, a species identifier, and a single word repeated over and over again: help. The species identifier made Danny's blood run cold. Villani. He knew that name. Every human who had ever studied their own history in space knew that name. 60 years ago, before Danny was even born, the Villani had done something that humanity had never forgotten. They had saved 12,000 human lives and asked for nothing in return. Danny pulled up the historical files while the distress signal continued to loop. The story was taught in schools. It was carved into monuments. It was the reason humanity had never stopped believing that kindness existed among the stars. The colony ship Wandering Hope had been carrying 12,000 settlers to a new world when its engines failed in the Varath Nebula. They were stranded in empty space, far from any human outpost, with failing life support and no way to call for help. They had days to live, maybe less. The Villani found them by accident. They were a small species, physically weak, with no military power and very little wealth. They were traveling through the nebula on a simple trading mission when they detected the dying human ship. They had no obligation to help. They had never even met humans before. The logical thing would have been to continue on their way and let nature take its course. But the Villani did not do the logical thing. They did the right thing. They gave everything they had. They sacrificed 3 of their own cargo ships to ferry the humans to safety. Their crews worked without rest for 4 days straight, carrying men, women, and children from the Wandering Hope to their own vessels. The conditions were cramped and difficult. Resources ran dangerously low. But the Villani never complained. They never hesitated. 400 Villani died in that rescue effort. Some from exhaustion. Some from accidents during the desperate transfers between ships. Some from giving up their own food and air so that human children could survive. When it was over, when all 12,000 humans had been delivered safely to the nearest outpost, the Villani simply left. They refused payment. They refused thanks. Their leader, a soft-spoken elder, had said only one thing before departing: "You needed help. We could help. That is enough." Humanity had never forgotten. And now, 60 years later, the Villani needed help. Danny worked through the rest of the night, cleaning up the signal and gathering information. By the time the sun rose over Earth Defense Command, he had pieced together the situation. It was bad. It was very bad. The Korth Dominion had blockaded the Villani homeworld. The Korth were everything the Villani were not. They were large, powerful, and cruel. They had conquered dozens of worlds through violence and intimidation. They took what they wanted and destroyed anyone who stood in their way. The Galactic Collective, the loose alliance of spacefaring species, had repeatedly condemned their actions, but had never done anything to stop them. Now the Korth wanted Valar Prime, the Villani homeworld. The planet was rich in rare minerals that the Korth needed for their war machines. The Villani had refused to hand over their home, so the Korth had surrounded them with 800 warships. They had given the Villani 3 days to surrender. If they did not, the bombardment would begin. The Villani had sent desperate messages to every species they knew, begging for help. The Galactic Collective had held an emergency vote. The result was overwhelming. Non-intervention. Nobody wanted to anger the Korth. Nobody wanted to risk their own people for a small, weak species with nothing to offer. Nobody except humanity. Danny brought his findings to Admiral Lisa Harper that morning. She was a tall woman in her 50s, with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. She listened without interrupting as Danny explained the situation. When he finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. "Pull up the historical records," she said finally. The rescue of the Wandering Hope, Danny did. The names of the 400 dead Villani scrolled across the screen. Each one a small light that had been extinguished so that humans could live. They never asked us for anything, Danny said quietly. In 60 years, they never once reminded us of what they did. They never tried to collect on the debt, Lisa nodded slowly. Because they didn't see it as a debt. They saw it as simply doing what was right. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the blue sky of Earth. The Galactic Collective thinks we're young and foolish. They think we make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. They think that makes us weak. Does it? Danny asked. Lisa turned back to face him. There was something fierce in her expression. Something that made Danny straighten in his chair. The Villani gave up everything to save our people. 400 of them died so that 12,000 of us could live. They did it because it was right, not because it was smart. And now they're going to be destroyed because nobody in this galaxy thinks helping them is worth the risk. She paused. What does it say about us if we let that happen? What does it say about humanity if we forget kindness just because remembering it is inconvenient? Danny had no answer, but he could see that Lisa had already made her decision. Within the hour, the orders went out. The entire Earth Defense Fleet began mobilization. Ships that had been stationed across human space received the same message. Return to Sol System immediately. Prepare for combat operations. In the halls of Earth Defense Command, officers who had never met the Villani read the historical files and volunteered for the mission. Pilots who had families to protect requested transfer to the front lines. Engineers worked double shifts to prepare ships for departure. Nobody ordered them to do any of this. Nobody forced them. They simply heard the story of what the Villani had done 60 years ago. And they made their choice. Humanity was going to return a favor. And they were going to return it with interest. Far away, on the besieged world of Valar Prime, High Speaker Tessith stood in her council chamber and watched the countdown to her people's extinction. She thought of the humans she had helped save so many years ago, back when she was young and the universe seemed full of possibility. She wondered if any of them were still alive. She wondered if any of them remembered. She did not know that the answer was already on its way. The Galactic Collective Council Chamber was a massive dome, floating in neutral space, built centuries ago as a place where all species could meet and discuss their differences. Thousands of delegates filled the curved seats that rose from the central floor to the distant ceiling. Lights of every color glowed from different sections, each representing a different species with different needs and different eyes. Today, every light was focused on the small human woman standing at the central podium. Ambassador Kate Morris was not physically impressive. She was short and soft-spoken, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Many of the delegates had dismissed her as weak when she first arrived at the collective 5 years ago. They had learned better since then, but some still underestimated her. The Galactic Collective has voted for non-intervention in the Valar Prime situation, Kate said, her voice calm and clear. Earth respects the decision of this body. However, Earth is not bound by it. As a sovereign member of the collective, we retain the right to conduct independent military operations. And so, I am here to formally announce that humanity will be intervening to protect the Villani homeworld. The chamber erupted. Delegates from dozens of species shouted over each other. Some demanded clarification. Some accused Earth of warmongering. Some simply stared in disbelief. The Korth representative, a massive creature covered in thick gray scales, pushed his way to a speaking platform. His name was Ambassador Vrek, and he had been the one to threaten the Villani with destruction. This is madness, he snarled. You have no treaty with the Villani. No trade agreements. No strategic interest in their world. What possible reason could you have for this foolishness? Kate turned to face him. Her expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes. The delegates closest to her would later describe it as the moment they realized that humans were not as soft as they appeared. 60 years ago, a human ship called the Wandering Hope suffered engine failure in the Varath Nebula. 12,000 of our people were stranded and dying. The Villani found them. They had no treaty with us, no trade agreements, no strategic interest. They saved our people anyway. 400 Villani died doing it. Kate paused. We have an interest, Ambassador. We remember our debts. Vrek made a sound that might have been a laugh. Sentiment. You would start a war over sentiment. Call it what you like. We call it honor. Another delegate spoke up, a tall being with 4 arms and nervous, flickering eyes. The Korth have 800 warships in the Valar system. Your entire fleet cannot match those numbers. You will be destroyed. Kate smiled, and several delegates felt suddenly uncomfortable without knowing why. Then we will be destroyed. But we will not abandon people who saved our lives simply because helping them is difficult. The chamber fell silent. No one quite knew what to say. The concept was foreign to most of them. Every species in the collective made decisions based on calculation, on cost and benefit, on strategic advantage. The idea of going to war for something as simple as a 60-year-old debt of kindness was almost beyond their understanding. Kate stepped away from the podium. This announcement is a courtesy. We do not require your approval. We do not ask for your help. We simply want the galaxy to know why we are doing what we are doing. She looked around the chamber one last time. Humanity remembers its friends. We hope the rest of you will remember that. She walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the delegates began to argue amongst themselves, but she did not look back. At the edge of the Sol system, the human fleet was gathering. Admiral Lisa Harper stood on the bridge of the Earth's memory, the flagship of the Earth Defense Fleet. Through the viewports, she could see ships arriving from every corner of human space, heavy battleships with scarred hulls and proud names, sleek cruisers built for speed and precision, carriers loaded with fighters and bombers, destroyers, frigates, support vessels. They came in 1s and 2s at first, then in squadrons, then in entire battle groups. 147 capital ships, 312 cruisers, over 1,000 smaller vessels. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Captain Ben Garcia arrived on a shuttle from his carrier, the Silent Fury. He was a young commander, barely 40. But he had proven himself in a dozen engagements against pirates and hostile forces. Lisa had requested him specifically for this mission. The final count is in, Ben said, handing her a datapad. We have more volunteers than we can take. Ships that were scheduled for maintenance are requesting permission to deploy anyway. Retired officers are reactivating their commissions. I've never seen anything like it. Lisa looked at the numbers. When the crews learned why we were going, what did they say? Most of them already knew the story. The Wandering Hope is famous. Everyone knows what the Vallani did for us. Ben hesitated. Some of them have family who were on that ship. Admiral, descendants of the people the Vallani saved. They say they're going to pay back a debt their grandparents owed. Lisa nodded slowly. And the ones who don't have that connection? They say they're going because it's the right thing to do, because someone has to, because if we don't help the Vallani now, after everything they did for us, then we don't deserve to call ourselves human. Lisa felt something warm in her chest. Pride, perhaps. Or hope. She had commanded soldiers for 30 years, and she had never been more proud of them than she was at this moment. The Korth outnumber us, she said. Their ships are larger. Their weapons are more powerful. On paper, we shouldn't win this fight. Ben nodded. On paper, the Vallani had no reason to help us either. They did it anyway. Lisa smiled. Then let's return the favor. The fleet finished assembling 6 hours later. Lisa stood before the main view screen and opened a channel to every ship under her command. Thousands of faces looked back at her, men and women of every background, united by a common purpose. You all know why we're here, she said. 60 years ago, the Vallani gave everything they had to save our people. They didn't ask for anything in return. They didn't expect anything in return. They helped us because we needed help, and they could provide it. That was enough for them. She paused, letting the words sink in. Now they need us. The Korth Dominion has surrounded their homeworld. The Galactic Collective has abandoned them. They have no one else. Just us. Lisa straightened. In a few hours, we're going to jump into a system controlled by one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. We're going to face odds that most species would call impossible. Some of us won't come home. The faces on the screen did not waver. Lisa had expected fear, hesitation, doubt. She saw none of it. Only determination. But we're going anyway. Because this is who we are. This is what humanity does. We remember our friends. We pay our debts, and we don't abandon the people who showed us kindness, no matter how dangerous it is to stand beside them. She took a deep breath. The Villani taught the galaxy something 60 years ago. They taught everyone that compassion still exists among the stars. Today, we're going to teach the galaxy something too. We're going to show them what happens when you threaten people humanity has sworn to protect. She looked at the assembled fleet one last time. All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump. Destination: Valar Prime. Let's go return a favor. The fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind 1,000 trails of light. And in the Valar system, the Korth waited, unaware that everything was about to change. Warlord Dreth stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Crushing Tide, and looked down at the pathetic world below him. Valar Prime was a small planet, blue and green, covered in shallow oceans and gentle forests. Its people were equally pathetic. Small, soft, glowing creatures who had never developed weapons capable of threatening anyone. 800 Korth warships surrounded the planet in a ring of steel and death. Each ship was massive, covered in thick armor plating, and armed with weapons that could glass a continent in minutes. The Villani had nothing that could even scratch the paint on a Korth hull. Their fate was already decided. They just didn't know it yet. Dreth had given them 3 days to surrender. That deadline was now less than 12 hours away. The Villani leadership had refused to submit, which meant that in 12 hours, Dreth would give the order to begin orbital bombardment. By the end of the day, Valar Prime would be a dead world, and its valuable minerals would belong to the Dominion. It was, Dreth thought, almost too easy. There was no honor in crushing something so weak. But orders were orders, and the Dominion needed those minerals. His censors officer, a younger Korth named Torvin, was the first to notice something strange. "Warlord," Torvin said, his voice uncertain. "I'm detecting unusual energy signatures at the edge of the system." Dreth turned with a frown. "Unusual how?" "Hyperspace signatures. Many of them. Very many." Torvin's scales had gone pale. "Warlord, I count over 100 capital-class signatures. More are appearing every second." Dreth crossed the deck in 3 strides and pushed Torvin aside to look at the readings himself. What he saw made no sense. Hyperspace signatures were blooming across his display like flowers in a field of death. 100, 200, 300. The numbers kept climbing. "What species?" Dreth demanded, cross-referencing now. Torvan's claws trembled over his console. "Warlord, the energy signatures match human vessels." "Humans?" Dreth made a sound of disbelief. "The humans are young and weak. They have no interest in this system. Why would they?" The sky tore open. 147 human capital ships dropped out of hyperspace directly between the Korth fleet and Valar Prime. They were followed by 300 cruisers. Then hundreds more, smaller vessels. The human fleet spread out in perfect formation, a wall of metal between the Korth and the world they had come to destroy. For a long moment, no one on the Crushing Tide spoke. Dreth stared at the display, trying to understand what he was seeing. The humans had come. The humans had actually come to defend the Villani. It made no sense. Humans had no treaty with the Villani. No trade agreements. No strategic interest in this worthless system. There was no logical reason for them to be here. A communication signal cut through Dreth's confusion. Someone was broadcasting on all frequencies, powerful enough to reach every ship in the system and every observation post within range. Korth Dominion vessels. The voice was female, calm and clear, speaking the common galactic language with a strange accent that Dreth had heard only a few times before. "Human, this is Admiral Lisa Harper, of the Earth Defense Fleet. You are blockading a world under the protection of Earth. You will withdraw immediately. or you will be destroyed. Dreth bared his teeth in what might have been a smile. The humans were brave, he had to admit. Foolish beyond measure, but brave. You have 60 seconds to comply. Dreth opened a return channel. Admiral Harper, I am Warlord Dreth of the Korth Dominion. I do not know what madness has brought you here, but you are making a serious mistake. The Vellani are nothing to you. They have nothing to offer you. Why would you risk your entire fleet for such a worthless species? The human admiral's response came without hesitation. 60 years ago, the Vellani found a human ship in distress. 12,000 of our people were dying. The Vellani gave up everything they had to save them. 400 Vellani died in the rescue effort. They asked for nothing in return. Dreth waited for more. There had to be more. Some strategic calculation. Some hidden agenda. Some secret resource that made this intervention logical. That's it, he said finally. That's why you're here? Because they helped you once, 60 years ago? They didn't just help us, Warlord. They saved us. They died for us. And they never asked for anything in return. Today we return the favor. You have 50 seconds. Dreth laughed. He couldn't help it. The humans were even more foolish than he had thought. They were willing to die for sentiment, for a debt that no one had asked them to pay. You are outnumbered, he said. Your ships are smaller. Your weapons are weaker. You cannot win this fight. 40 seconds. I have 800 warships. You have less than 200 capital vessels. Do the mathematics, Admiral. 30 seconds. Dreth felt his amusement fading. The human was not afraid. She should have been afraid. Anyone with sense would be afraid, facing the odds she faced. But there was no fear in her voice. Only cold, absolute certainty. 20 seconds. You are throwing away your lives for nothing, Dreth snarled. The Vellani are weak. They will never be able to repay this sacrifice. You gain nothing from this. 10 seconds. Dreth glanced at his tactical display. His ships were already moving into attack formation, ready to crush the human fleet with overwhelming force. But something nagged at him. Something in the human admiral's voice made him uneasy. This is your last chance, Warlord. Withdraw your fleet, or face the consequences. I do not retreat, Dreth said. The Korth Dominion does not retreat. There was a pause. Then Admiral Harper spoke again, and her voice was like ice. Time's up. The human fleet opened fire. Across the galaxy, observation posts picked up the transmissions and relayed them to their homeworlds. Species that had never taken much interest in humans watched the confrontation unfold. The Galactic Collective Council, still in session after Kate Morris's announcement, received a live feed of the battle. They watched the small, outnumbered human fleet charge directly into the teeth of the Korth Armada. They watched human ships take hit after hit, burning and bleeding, but never retreating. They watched pilots fly impossible maneuvers, captains sacrifice their own vessels to protect their comrades, crews fight with a ferocity that defied all logic. And they began to understand something that they had never understood before. Humans were not like them. Humans did not calculate the odds before deciding whether to help someone. Humans did not weigh costs and benefits when a friend was in danger. Humans remembered their debts, and they paid them in full, no matter the price. On Valar Prime, High Speaker Tessith watched the battle through her council chamber's view screen. Tears streamed down her face, leaving glowing trails on her skin. She did not know how to process what she was seeing. An entire fleet had come to save her people. Thousands of beings were dying to protect a world they had never visited, for a species they had never met. Why? She whispered to herself. Why would they do this? And somewhere in her ancient heart, she already knew the answer. Because 60 years ago, her people had done the same thing for them. The battle for Valar Prime was not what the Korth expected. It was not what anyone expected. The galaxy had watched humans for 3 centuries, ever since they first ventured into space. Most species had dismissed them as young, emotional, and primitive. Their ships were smaller than Korth vessels. Their weapons were less powerful. Their fleet was less experienced. By every measure the galaxy used to judge military strength, the humans should have been crushed within the first hour. But the galaxy had measured the wrong things. The Korth fought with overwhelming force. They were used to winning through sheer size and power. When they encountered resistance, they simply brought more ships, fired more weapons, and crushed their enemies beneath a tide of destruction. It had worked against every species they had ever faced. It did not work against humans. The human fleet did not meet the Korth head-on. Instead, they scattered into smaller groups, darting through the Korth formation like wolves among bulls. They struck at weak points, exploited gaps in the enemy line, and vanished before the Korth could bring their full firepower to bear. When the Korth turned to face one threat, another appeared behind them. Captain Megan Torres commanded the destroyer, Relentless, from the heart of the battle. Her ship was small compared to the Korth warships, barely a tenth of their size, but she used that size to her advantage, weaving between enemy vessels where larger ships could not follow. Target their engine sections, she ordered her weapons crew. They can't chase us if they can't move. The Relentless fired a spread of missiles at a Korth cruiser, striking the weak point where its engines connected to its hull. The cruiser shuddered and began to drift, its propulsion systems crippled. Megan was already turning to the next target before the first one stopped moving. A Korth battleship locked onto her ship and opened fire. The first shot missed. The second grazed the Relentless's shields. The third hit them directly. The bridge shook. Alarms screamed. Damage reports flooded in from every section. Shields down to 40%, her first officer reported. Hull breaches on decks 5 and 7. Keep moving, Megan said through gritted teeth. We stop, we die. The Relentless took 17 direct hits over the next 2 hours. Each one should have been enough to destroy a ship her size. But Megan kept her moving, kept her fighting, kept her crew alive through a combination of skill, luck, and sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. In the chaos of battle, Lieutenant Chris Parker flew his fighter through a storm of weapons fire. He was part of a squadron launched from the carrier Silent Fury, tasked with protecting Velar Prime from any Korth bombers that got past the main fleet. The Korth had sent dozens of bombers toward the planet's surface. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy a city. If even one got through, thousands of Velani would die. Chris and his squadron intercepted the first wave of bombers at the edge of the atmosphere. His missiles struck 2 of them, sending them spiraling into the void as burning wreckage. A third bomber exploded under his guns, then a fourth, then he ran out of missiles. A 5th bomber was ahead of him, accelerating toward a Velani population center. Chris could see the city below, filled with soft lights and gentle people who had never harmed anyone. If that bomber reached its target, all those lights would go dark forever. He pushed his engines to maximum and caught up with the bomber. His guns were empty. He had no missiles left. He had nothing, except his ship and his determination. Chris Parker aimed his fighter at the bomber's engines and accelerated. The collision tore both ships apart. Chris ejected half a second before impact, his escape pod tumbling through the atmosphere as the bomber disintegrated around him. He would spend 6 hours floating in space before a rescue ship found him. Barely alive, but smiling. The city below was safe. That was enough. On the bridge of the Earth's memory, Admiral Lisa Harper directed the battle with cold precision. She moved squadrons, like pieces on a chessboard, always staying one step ahead of the Korth commanders. When they massed their forces in one area, she struck them in another. When they tried to break through to the planet, she threw her heaviest ships in their path. But the Korth had numbers on their side, and numbers always mattered in war. 3 hours into the battle, the human fleet had destroyed over 100 Korth ships, but they had lost 30 of their own, and more were damaged. The Korth were adapting, learning to counter human tactics. They were beginning to coordinate their attacks, boxing in human squadrons and destroying them with concentrated fire. Lisa watched another cruiser vanish in a ball of flame on her tactical display. That was the 23rd ship she had lost today. Nearly 2,000 more dead under her command. Admiral, her communications officer called out. The Korth flagship is moving toward the planet. They're attempting to break through our line for orbital bombardment. Lisa looked at the display. The crushing tide was the largest ship in the Korth fleet, bristling with weapons capable of sterilizing entire continents. If it reached bombardment range of Velar Prime, nothing they had could stop it. All ships, concentrate fire on the flagship, she ordered. We cannot let it reach the planet. The human fleet turned as one, pouring everything they had at the crushing tide. Missiles streaked across the void, energy beams carved through space. The Korth flagship's shields flared under the assault, but it kept moving. It was not enough. The crushing tide was too large, too heavily armored, too powerful. It was going to reach Velar Prime. Lisa made a decision. "Helm," she said quietly, "put us between the flagship and the planet." Her bridge crew turned to look at her. They understood what she was ordering. The Earth's memory was the most powerful ship in the human fleet, but it was still no match for the crushing tide in a direct confrontation. "Admiral," her first officer said carefully, "if we do that, we'll be directly in their line of fire." "I know." Lisa stood and walked to the front of the bridge, looking out at the stars. "Open a channel to the Korth flagship." The channel opened. Warlord Dreth's face appeared on the screen, his scales dark with rage and confusion. The battle was not going as he had planned. The humans were fighting with a ferocity he had never encountered before. "Admiral Harper," he snarled, "you have fought well. Better than I expected. But this battle is over. Stand aside, and I will spare what remains of your fleet." Lisa shook her head. "I told you at the beginning, Warlord. If one bomb touches that planet, I will hunt down every ship in your fleet, every station in your territory, every world that shelters you. This is not a threat. It is a promise. You cannot stop me. Your ship is no match for mine." "Maybe not." Lisa smiled, and there was something terrible in that smile. "But I can slow you down long enough for the rest of my fleet to tear you apart. And I promise you, Warlord, if you fire on that planet, my people will never stop coming for you. We will hunt the Korth to the ends of the galaxy. We will make you pay for every Vellani life you take." She leaned forward. "Is that world worth it? Is it worth the war you'll start if you continue?" Dreth stared at her. The human admiral was not bluffing. He could see it in her eyes. She would die here, in front of his guns, and her people would take revenge. The humans were irrational. They were emotional. They were willing to sacrifice everything for a species that could offer them nothing. They were terrifying. The crushing tide slowed. Then it stopped. Then, slowly, it began to turn away from Velar Prime. "All ships," Dreth said, his voice hollow, "withdraw from the system." The Korth fleet began to retreat. One by one, then in groups, then in a flood, they jumped to hyperspace and fled. Behind them, they left 300 destroyed ships and the shattered remains of their reputation. The battle for Velar Prime was over. The humans had won. The silence that followed the battle was almost louder than the fighting itself. For 6 hours, the human fleet had torn through the most powerful military force in the quadrant. 300 Korth ships had been destroyed. 200 more had been crippled. The rest had fled in disgrace, chased away by a species the galaxy had dismissed as young and weak. The cost had been high. 42 human ships would never return home. 11,000 men and women had died defending a world they had never seen, protecting a people they had never met. Their names would be carved into monuments on Earth, remembered alongside the 400 Vellani who had died saving humans 60 years before. Admiral Lisa Harper stood on the bridge of the Earth's memory and watched her fleet take up defensive positions around Velar Prime. The battle was over, but she did not relax. She would not relax until every surviving human was accounted for and every wounded soldier was receiving care. "Final casualty reports are coming in," her first officer said quietly. 11,412 confirmed dead. Another 3,000 wounded. Lisa closed her eyes. Each number was a person, a family torn apart, a future that would never be. She had ordered them into battle, knowing many would not return, and they had followed her anyway. "They knew the risks," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "They came anyway." "Yes, Admiral, they did." Lisa opened her eyes and looked out at the blue and green world below. Valar Prime was safe. The Vallani would live. It did not make the losses easier to bear, but it made them meaningful. "Send a message to High Speaker Tessith," she said. "Tell her the threat has been neutralized. Her world is under Earth's protection for as long as she wants it." Below, on the surface of Valar Prime, the Vallani emerged from their shelters and looked up at the sky. For 3 days, they had lived in fear, waiting for the end to come. Now strange ships orbited their world, and their enemies were gone. High Speaker Tessith stood in the central square of her capital city, surrounded by thousands of her people. They all looked to her for answers, for explanations, for some way to understand what had happened. She had none to give them. She only knew that they were alive because a species they had helped once, long ago, had remembered. A shuttle descended from the human flagship and landed in the square. The crowd parted as the doors opened, and a small group of humans stepped out. At their head was Admiral Lisa Harper. Tessith had never seen a human in person before. They were taller than she expected, and more solid. Lisa Harper moved with the careful grace of a warrior, but her eyes were kind. She looked tired, Tessith thought. Tired and sad and proud. All at once, Lisa approached the High Speaker and stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You came," Tessith said finally. Her voice was small and trembling. "After all these years, you came." Lisa nodded. "We should have come sooner. We should have been here from the beginning." She paused. "I'm sorry it took us so long." Tessith shook her head. "You lost so many. So many of your people died for us. How can we ever repay such a debt?" Lisa knelt down so she could look Tessith in the eyes. The Vallani elder was small and fragile, glowing with soft blue light. She looked like she might break at any moment. "60 years ago," Lisa said gently, "your people found a human ship in trouble. 12,000 of us were dying. You gave up everything you had to save them. 400 of your people died in the rescue." She reached out and took Tessith's hands in her own. "You never asked for anything in return. You just helped because it was the right thing to do." Tessith felt tears forming in her eyes. The memories of that day were still vivid, even after so many decades. "We don't forget kindness," Lisa continued. "We don't abandon our friends, and we don't keep count of who owes what to whom. You helped us because we needed help. We helped you because you needed help. That's what friends do." Tessith could not speak. She simply held onto the human's hands and wept. Across the galaxy, the news spread like fire. The Galactic Collective Council watched recordings of the battle in stunned silence. Species that had never paid attention to humans suddenly became very interested in them. Ambassadors began reviewing every interaction their people had ever had with Earth. The Korth Dominion sent a formal protest to human space, demanding reparations for the ships they had lost. Ambassador Kate Morris responded by transmitting a single document to their capital. The list of every Vallani who had died, saving the Wandering Hope. 400 names. Nothing more. The protest was quietly withdrawn. Other species began to reach out to humanity through diplomatic channels. Some wanted to establish better relations. Some wanted to apologize for past offenses they suddenly remembered. Some simply wanted to understand. "Why?" asked a delegate from a neutral world during a diplomatic meeting. "You had nothing to gain. The Vallani could never repay you. Why would you sacrifice so much for them?" Kate Morris smiled. "Because they did the same for us once. Because kindness should be repaid with kindness. Because that's who we are." The delegate was not satisfied with this answer. It did not make logical sense. But he was beginning to understand that humans did not operate on logic alone. In the months that followed, a quiet change swept through the galaxy. Species that had ignored humans began to treat them with new respect. Species that had mistreated humans began to worry. Because if humanity was willing to fight and die for a species that had helped them once, what would they do to species that had wronged them? The Korth Dominion closed its borders and began fortifying its systems. They had seen what humans could do in battle. They had no desire to see it again. A dozen other species suddenly remembered old conflicts with humanity. Trade disputes, territorial disagreements, ships that had been attacked, colonists who had been mistreated. None of it had seemed important at the time. Humans were young and weak, and nobody had expected them to hold grudges. Now everyone remembered that humans had very long memories indeed. On Earth, the survivors of the battle returned to heroes' welcomes. Commander Danny Cole, who had first received the Villani distress signal, was promoted to captain. Lieutenant Chris Parker, who had rammed his fighter into a Korth bomber to save a Villani city, received the highest medal humanity could offer. Captain Megan Torres and her crew were given a new ship to replace the battered Relentless. Admiral Lisa Harper returned to a planet that loved her, but she spent most of her time visiting the families of those who had not come home, telling them how their loved ones had fought, how they had died, how they had made a difference. They saved a world, she told one grieving mother. They saved an entire species. Because of them, millions of Villani children will grow up in peace. Your son died a hero. It was not enough. It could never be enough. But it was all she had to offer. Months turned into years. The galaxy settled into a new normal, one shaped by the memory of what had happened at Valar Prime. Humanity was no longer dismissed as young and foolish. They were respected, feared, and sometimes even admired. And in the halls of power across 1,000 worlds, leaders studied their histories with humanity very carefully. They counted every kindness, every insult, every moment of connection and conflict. They wondered what the humans remembered. They wondered what the humans might do. Because humanity had proven something that day over Valar Prime. They had shown the galaxy that they were willing to die for their friends. They had shown that kindness would be repaid with kindness. And everyone knew what that implied about cruelty. On Valar Prime, High Speaker Tessith lived out the rest of her days in peace. She often spoke of the humans who had saved her people, of the strange species that remembered debts of kindness across generations. She told the story to her children and grandchildren, and they told it to theirs. They could have forgotten, she would say. They could have calculated the costs and decided we weren't worth the price. But they didn't. They came for us because we came for them. They died for us because we died for them. She would smile then, her old face glowing with soft blue light. Humans remember everything, she would tell them. Every kindness, every cruelty, everything. So be kind to them. If you ever meet them, be kind, and they will remember. Far away, among the stars, humanity watched and waited. They were patient, they had long memories, and they remembered everything. The galaxy would never forget that.